Thank you for joining today's Watershed Advisory Committee meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Donna Friedman to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today at the October 2020 Cuyahoga River North Watershed Advisory Committee update meeting. If you recall, our March WAC meeting for the Cuyahoga River North Watershed was canceled due to COVID-19, and so in order to make up for some of that missed time, we've actually doubled the length of this presentation. So we look forward to answering your questions at the end of hour 4. And I'm joking, of course. So if you do have questions, you don't have to wait to the end. You can just type those in the message box, and Keith McClintock, our manager of watershed programs, will be fielding those questions. Today's presentation will be the normal amount of time, not 4 hours, and we should wrap up around 3:30 p.m. It will be packed with exciting updates, and that brings us to the agenda. So first up, I'll go through some information, and then I'll hand it off to Lila Zotner, our project manager for property acquisition, and Paul Kowalczyk, our stormwater project specialist. And they'll be talking about property acquisition and about a new process that we have for requesting grant support for projects like the 319 and similar. Rachel Webb, the senior project manager for Cuyahoga River North, South, and for advanced planning, we'll touch on where we are in the master planning process. John Brower, who now oversees the entire service area as a supervisor for the stormwater inspection and maintenance team, will discuss their current work as well as the Labor Day storm. Following that, we have a special guest presentation from Kevin Fries at the Office of Emergency Management. And then lastly, Janet Popielski, manager of the stormwater program, will follow Kevin with an update on our stormwater construction program. I'll bring it to a close. After that, to start us off though, I'll turn it over to Frank Greenland, Director of Watershed Programs, for a few words.
Okay, thanks, Donna. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for attending. We've got a good agenda. We've had we've had a good year actually, but with the COVID impacts, we've had some revenue shortfalls and we had to pull back a little bit, but we had some big storms this year. We're able to handle them well. I think the cooperation between the communities, the discussion and coordination between the communities and the district's stormwater staff has been really great. I wanted to mention 2 things. One, the COVID impact to the stormwater budget. We were asked to pull about $6 million out of the budget due to concerns about revenue shortfalls. That's a fairly decent chunk of our stormwater budget. We had to pull back some contractual services. It slowed down a couple projects. We still have projects occurring, design and construction phases. The maintenance program was not impacted, but it did cause us a little bit of shortfall. We'll see what next year's about. We're in the middle of a rate study. The district's wastewater and stormwater rates and fees are set through 2021. So we're in the middle of the rate study that is analyzing what will 2022 through 26 be, both stormwater fee and wastewater rate. We had 2 big storms this year. I just want to talk briefly about those storms. The one in March. March was as wet as could be, so we had all kinds of rain, and then we had a really big storm. And we had significant debris deposition in a lot of locations. We successfully removed that debris. It was the #1 in terms of cubic yards of debris removed across the service area. #1 since the program started. We had another event during Labor Day. Different type of rain, but still a pretty, a very significant accumulation over a 6-hour, 7-hour period. Again, we had a lot of debris deposition, second highest since the program started. Now, what's really significant, I just wanted to point this out because this stuff's not going to go away, and we're going to have to deal with it. At least for the Big Creek gauge and the Cuyahoga Rivers, the USGS stream gauges, Big Creek has been online, I forget. But it's been quite a while, 40 plus years, I think, roughly. And the Cuyahoga gauge has been on for 100 years or so. We saw those two storm events were two of the top 10 in terms of stage in the period of record for those streams. That's pretty significant. They had two storms in your top 10 of all time in 1 year. For Big Creek, I think 4 of the top 10 is in the last 15 years or so, 15 to 20. And on the Cuyahoga's gauge, 7 of the top 10 are in the last 20 years. So it kind of tells you what's going on. You know, you can be a believer of climate change or not. Doesn't matter to me. The precipitation has changed, and we're seeing more spiky rains in short periods of time, and we're actually seeing more total accumulation over the year. The last time I checked the Hopkins gauge, we were 10 or 11 inches above normal, and it's raining today. So we're just going to have to effectively deal with this. The maintenance crews are doing a great job. We're going to complete all of our master plans by next year. Cuyahoga North is complete. And we're taking a look at those projects and trying to prioritize projects to push what we call levels of service for protection against flooding and erosion up from very low levels to as high as we can get, and do that in increments. And we're poised and ready to do so. So we'll get into a budget cycle. We're in the next year's budget cycle right now. We're in the prioritization process right now. I think you'll hear a little bit about that. But I like where the program's at, and I love the communication coordination with the communities. I think it's really good. And on the local level, your utilization of your local share has been really good, and we need that to continue. So that's all I've got, and thanks for attending.
Thanks, Frank. We appreciate that update. So on this slide, you can see the numbers related to the current state of the Community Cost Share Program. We encourage you to continue to apply for that funding to bolster projects that you're working on currently or going to be working on for MS4 compliance or any local stormwater issue that needs addressing. Those applications can be submitted to your watershed team leader for processing. Additionally, if you're done with the project and you have not requested reimbursement, please do so. This allows us to close out the project and helps you to regain the funds that you spent on that project. A final reminder, there are 2 types of agreements, the standard community cost share agreement and the allocation agreement. In the standard agreement, you apply for the funds, the use of the funds is approved, the agreement is executed, and then the funds are encumbered in your community cost share account. There's also the allocation agreement. This form of agreement allows the community to get pre-approval of the use of money that is not yet accumulated in their account. So when an allocation agreement is executed, the funds do not become encumbered the way that they do with the normal standard agreement. The community can only request reimbursement for funds if they have accumulated in their account. So this is not a loan, it's just pre-approval for that use of the money once it gets into your account. We are wrapping up a 1-page document that helps explain the benefits and the uses of these 2 types of agreements. And that'll be sent out, we hope, by the end of the year, and we'll post that on the website under the community cost share section. On our wastewater side of the house, our local sewer system evaluation studies are moving along nicely, as you can see on this slide. One point of clarification for the Southwest Interceptor area is that phase 1 focused on Seven Hills, Parma, and Parma Heights, and phase 2 will be the other communities that you see in purple. These reports and the solution development for all of the LSSESs are there to assist in the future planning of infrastructure rehabilitation and replacement in your communities. These documents will also help provide some of the needed data to apply for the member community infrastructure grant dollars in future years. So moving on to the member community infrastructure program, our funding, which is also within, for this program, which is in the wastewater budget, was reduced for the 2021 awards to $2.5 million. We are currently tracking a revenue decline due to COVID-19, and we'll be monitoring that as the year rolls on. There were 7 projects awarded for 2021. 3 were the classic MCIP design and construction application, and then 4 were the newer type of application that was for design only for those projects that needed further vetting and investment. If you did apply for funds for 2021, then you should have received this information shown on this chart in an email. But these were the projects that were funded based on our scoring for this round of applications. We encourage you to continue to apply if you did not receive funding in this 2021 round. We do anticipate funding of MCIP in 2022, and that will be determined by the rate study, as Frank was talking about. We also plan to continue with both application types. It seemed to be successful, and we got applications for both types. So there will be the design and construction and the design only option moving forward. And as always, if you have any questions about these slides, about community cost share, SSES, your watershed team leader is your best resource. So that'll either be me, Jeff Jowett, or Myron Borchards, and we're available to help you. And my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So with that, are there any questions, Keith, that you saw pop up in the chat box?
I have not.
Okay, great. Well, we'll keep on rolling. Next up is Lila Zotner, project manager for property acquisition, and Paul Kowalczyk, stormwater project specialist. Lila?
Thanks, Donna. Hello, everyone. As Donna said, my name is Lila Zotner. I'm the project manager for property acquisition at the sewer district. So I just have 2 slides to share with you quickly about property acquisition. You can read the information on the left, the program goals. What I primarily want to focus on is our acquisition process. I did talk about this last year, but for new folks, I feel like it's important to know how we go about property acquisition in terms of fee simple properties as well as appraisals. To begin our process, we start with outreach. That's usually done by our watershed team leader as well as myself. And that's outreach to the communities to talk about our assembly goals, our plans, and your expectations in terms of maintenance and demolition throughout the process. The next step is that we assign a project to a consultant. Currently, we work with 3 right-of-way consultants. We work with Creek, Western Reserve, and OR Colon. They are a representative in the neighborhood. They're the ones out knocking on doors and working with individual homeowners. They provide some strategic thought and implementation to our land assembly. The next step, excuse me, is resident communication. Once someone is nodding their head and saying, okay, we'll go along with this, we then take them through a process that includes first an appraisal. An appraisal is done by a third party outside of the district. That appraisal is then sent for appraisal review, and then it turns into a fair market offer. We do pay fair market for all fee simple purchases as well as easements. Next, it will go to our board. All property transactions at the district go through our board of directors, and then finally it will go into a traditional closing. If we are doing a fee simple purchase and someone isn't ready to move out, we do offer a lease, generally up to about 6 months. The leases are free of charge, although they are expected to pay their utilities and insurance while they're remaining in the home. Once the individual is ready or the family is ready to move out, we will then do a move out inspection. Our consultants do that work, and then it goes into a periodic inspection. The properties are given an internal and external inspection approximately every 3 weeks, just making sure that the property is still secure and that there aren't any unforeseen issues happening inside of the property. During that time, we are providing grounds maintenance. Our swim department provides that maintenance. Generally, we mow about once a week during the beginning of the season and the high point in the season, and then we switch over to once every 2 weeks towards the ends of the season. Finally, we demolish the property. Our demolition contractor is currently the Cuyahoga Land Bank. They do all of our demolition. They are responsible for getting the demolition permits, working with the individual communities in that process. Once the property is demolished, we will generally do a smaller water resource project, or we'll maintain it, the property as a residential vacant lot as we continue our land assembly for a larger project. You can see the numbers on the slide. We've had great success. To date, we have purchased 41 fee simple properties as well as 86 permanent easements. and that's a total investment of $8.5 million. Next slide, please. Thank you. I was asked to highlight one of our larger land assembly projects. So we chose the Hemlock Creek Bank Stabilization. This project seeks to realign a portion of the Hemlock Creek to improve storage and conveyance and to reduce erosion along this section of the creek. The area went through conceptual planning beginning in 2018 and land assembly began in 2019. You can see from the map that we have acquired 9 of the 12 privately owned residences that we seek to purchase. Of those, 6 have been demolished, and the rest will be demolished as folks end their leases and move out. Looking at the map, the red properties are properties that we have acquired. The purple properties are properties that we are still interested in acquiring, and the blue property is a property that was recently approved by our board. We are now done with phase 1 of land assembly. So we plan to start phase 1 design. And while that moves forward, we'll move on to phase 2 of land assembly. The total investment thus far in this area is $2.4 million. We expect it to land somewhere around $3.1 million for property acquisition. I did want to highlight one of the best parts about this assembly so far has been the mutual benefits that we've experienced with the city of Seven Hills. We have allowed the emergency services departments for Seven Hills Fire Department, as well as the regional SWAT team, to use these properties for training for their emergency services before they're demolished. So right before they're demolished, they go in and they're able to try out their skills and use the properties for training, something that in a lot of communities, they don't have the opportunity to do very often. So as we do land assembly in your neighborhoods, if you are interested in those opportunities, please reach out for us to consider that. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Paul Kowalczyk. Thank you.
Thanks, Lila. Just to give you an update on how we help grant projects. In the past, the district has used stormwater funds to help leverage state and federal grant money, excuse me, to benefit the regional stormwater system. Specifically, we made it a practice to provide grant funding or match funding for grants. This includes, but really isn't limited to, how EPA 319 funding, Sustain Our Great Lakes funding, Clean Ohio funding, and Coastal Management Assistant grants. For 2021 and beyond, we want to formalize the process for distributing matching funds for grants. We've designated $500,000 in matching stormwater funds available for grant-funded projects for 2021. Next slide, please. We'd like people to keep their requests under $300,000 for each individual project. Next slide. And what we'd like to see in each application package is a good project summary with some anticipated outcomes, a cost estimate with some line item and unit costs and total cost of the project, a concept graphic showing the work area. Hopefully this is along the regional stormwater system, and the dollar amount you're requesting from the district. You can use the 9-element the summary sheets from the 9-element non-point source implementation plans as a template for your application. This is required for 319 applications anyway, but we'd like to see a little more detail from the cost estimate standpoint and the project summary standpoint. And then email it to me. Next slide, please. Email it to me by the end of this year. And what we will do is we will nominate each application to our stormwater construction plan and rank them in our typical scoring system. Funding will be distributed according to rank, of course, and we can be available to assist with developing concepts, sediment estimates, QHEIs, those sorts of things that might be necessary. We can provide in-kind services even if we don't award funds. And what we want is a project that results in improvements to the regional stormwater system. And I'll say a little bit more straightforward this time, that this funding is to leverage grant money. The funding is not designated to fund a project outright. So, next slide. Thank you. So if there are any questions, I don't know, Keith, if there's anything typed in specifically for Lila and myself.
There is not.
Okay, then let's move on. I think Rachel Webb is next to talk about the Stormwater Master Plan.
Thanks, Paul. So Stormwater Master Plan, Cuyahoga River North. Next slide. Just to give you an idea, so it is done. Started in 2017. We are done now in 2020. I think with resounding success. I'll go into some more detail there. We are 3/4 of the way done with our stormwater master planning for our service area. Rocky River is set to complete in November, leaving only the Chagrin River and Lake Erie direct tributaries to complete in 2021. So with that, the next slide, please. We ended up in the Cuyahoga River North Master Plan with 70+ problem areas. You can see a rough outline of those problem areas across the north boundaries there. All of those problem areas were nominated to our stormwater construction plan this year for ranking, scoring and ranking. So they're all in there. It is a heavy lift. We're talking about over $500 million in construction cost for the north. I do say that knowing that it is a high level of service in these master plans. So we're reaching or striving for a 100-year level of service with these recommendations for each of the problem areas. As we start to move into the problem areas, and look at them more closely, we'll probably be modifying that to a lower level of service. And so you might see some changes in those costs. So it's going to be a cost benefit analysis as we get into each one of those areas. So next slide, please. The results of the master plan. So we have a final stormwater master plan report. They are divided by sub-watersheds. So Hemlock, Mill, Big Creek Main Branch, Big Creek West Branch, West Creek, Stickney, Mill Creek, and there's some small tributaries, unnamed tributaries there, and I probably missed one in that listing, but you can see a number of those sub-watershed reports have been generated. There's also an inspection maintenance action plan. This is an action plan that goes to the Stormwater Inspection and Maintenance Group, and they look at the results in the flooding for crossings and culverts, and they use those recommendations in how they do their inspection and maintenance activities. There's also, and I will go into a little bit more detail, a plethora of data. We have a lot of data that was generated through these master plans, inspection data, just even from the beginning, culvert inspection data, PACP reports. So there's a lot of information available, and we're putting all that together into our district GIS. And I'll talk about a little later about how and our, the availability of that data to you as communities as you need it. There's also community reports, and this is what you are getting from your watershed team leader. So this is a summary of the stormwater master plan analysis, what was done, and then the recommendations by or for your community. So that includes problem area descriptions for each of the problem areas in your community. If you haven't received it, talk to your watershed team leaders. I believe they have been distributing them now over the last month or so. So once you've taken a look at that report, we're happy to talk to you about it in more detail. We would love to go through it with you, address any questions that you have, any information you would like more on for each of those areas in your community. Next slide. So here you can kind of see 70+ problem areas that we have, the distribution of that. The small tributaries east and west, you can see a smaller number, smaller areas. These are problem areas that we're looking to continue to support the communities in what they're doing already. But you can see overall, the Big Creek main branch is a substantial contributing in terms of problem areas, and there's a number of costs associated in there, very urban area. But we will start looking at these projects in more detail, and these are just estimates at a high level of service of 100 years. So some of that will get modified as we move further into these problem areas and design. So next slide, please. An example of what we've been doing with these master plan reports and recommendations, we have 3 projects that are underway right now in the Big Creek that resulted or are from the master plans. We have a project looking at the Culvert at Sprague Road in North Royalton. The image you have there represents the Big Creek stream restoration upstream and downstream of Ridge Road. And then we have Ridgewood Basin in Parma. That project is just now kicking off. So these are the results from the master plan that are being used. And that list will just get longer as we move down the line. Next slide, please. As I mentioned from the master plans, there is quite a bit of data that is available for you as a community to use, not to mention the rainfall data that we have available. Some of you have already talked to us or engaged with us and have gotten some of the model information, some of the inventory, our CCTV for culverted streams. So if there's any of this information that you are interested in as you're doing some of your own projects, I know we would love to be able to share that with you and make it available. And all of that starts and ends with your watershed team leader and me in terms of the data. But the team leader is the best place to start, and they will forward it to me and we will move on from there to get you the information that you need. So that's really a summary of the Stormwater Master Plan. As I said, it's wrapping up. So we're moving from this planning phase into the implementation of those recommendations. So with that implementation, there is some more additional planning that we need to do. This is not perpetual planning, but we do have problem areas, as you can see here, very complex problem areas that for reasons, additional reasons, next slide, for specific reasons need some additional planning based on those recommendations. Next slide, please. An example of where we started with advanced planning is this problem area in Parma in Big Creek. This is a, excuse me. This is about 3 miles of regional stormwater system, but just under a mile of culverted stream. We have 4 basins that are impacted in this problem area: upper and lower Ridgewood basins, upper and lower Twin Lakes. And this problem area cost is about $36 million. So as a problem area itself, $36 million is not something we can implement in one shot. So understanding the problems that we have and that we've identified through the master planning with structural issues with the culvert, erosion along some of the open stream, we have some exposed utilities, we have flooding of buildings and roadways. So understanding those problems and the goals of the recommendations to mitigate those. Next slide. We have about 7 major activities that were recommended under the master plan that you can see there for that $36 million recommendation. Next slide. Our goal with the advanced planning really is to accept those recommendations. So we're comfortable with the recommendations, but we need to break that apart. We need to make that into smaller, more manageable packages. And then, but doing so, we need to do it in a way that is orchestrated, a defined sequence. So we have the most, I guess the biggest bang for our buck, if you would say, starting off. So where we can see the most reduction in flooding with a particular action. So how do we set that up and implement it over time? to get the benefits that we want. In addition, as I mentioned, we're also going to be reviewing the level of service goals to maximize the benefit versus the cost here. So those are kind of the three major points with the advanced planning. So we can break it into smaller manageable projects, orchestrate it to have the most impact as we move forward with each package, and then look at the level of service goals to see where we can find more maybe of a sweet spot to bring that level of service up at a higher increment, but maybe not reach that 100-year level of service. So that is where we're headed with the advanced planning. So this is one of the first projects that we're getting started with that, and that will be kicking off here probably at the end of the month. Next slide. And I believe I have now finished with my piece and am going to transition over to John Brower to go over stormwater inspection and maintenance, unless there are any questions.
All right, thanks, Rachel. For today's stormwater inspection and maintenance update, we'll be talking about 4 areas of the SWIM program, our 2020 inspection program, our 2020 maintenance program, and updated on our culverted stream inspections, and we'll touch on some highlights from the Labor Day storm event. Moving on to our 2020 maintenance program. Next slide, please. This map depicts all of the spots along the Cuyahoga River North subwatershed where SWIM has performed inspections this year. You can see up to the right, we're at about 344 inspections in the Cuyahoga River North. Next slide. The green dots on this map, which we call responsible party benchmark inspections, are basically assets, mainly crossings along the regional system that are owned by others. Other entities such as the ODOT, the county, the national park, et cetera, who actually own and inspect their own assets. So rather than duplicate our work, we'll be reaching out in the coming months in order to obtain those inspection reports from those agencies. Next slide. Moving on to our 2020 maintenance program. This is a map of all of our maintenance activities thus far this year in the north. As you can see, we've completed 58 debris and sediment removals, accounting for about 894 cubic yards of debris. We've also removed about 4,100 cubic yards of sediment. We've completed 6 other projects, which include a small-scale stream bank stabilization in Brooklyn Heights, a few tree removals, and some CCTV work in Garfield Heights. Next slide, please. This slide is comparing our 2020 maintenance versus our 2019 maintenance. As you can see, in 2020, we've completed about a dozen more projects than in 2019 at this time. However, our debris and sediment removal volumes are down just a bit. Next slide. Here's an example of the small-scale maintenance project that I mentioned previously. This is West Creek over in Brooklyn Heights at Lancaster Road. As you can see in the picture on the left, some right bank erosion was encroaching on the abutment footer of this bridge. So our temporary solution for this problem was to install some soil-choked riprap and we seeded it and then also installed some live stakes just upstream of the footer that you see on the right. Earlier this summer, it was mid-August actually, we took on quite a large dredging project at the Carouche Stormwater Detention Facility. It's on the border of Warrensville Heights in Cleveland, which is a regional basin, inline basin, really plagued by a lot of sedimentation due to some pretty severe erosion upstream. Our debris and sediment removal contractor went in, removed about 4,000 cubic yards to try to restore some of that active storage volume. That material was stockpiled on site. It's currently dewatering and it'll be hauled off site at a later date. Next slide. I'll touch briefly on our culverted stream inspection update. With the completion of many of the master plans throughout the service area, we now have valuable CCTV and PACP inspection reports from those master plan studies. So we're going through those reports and identifying problem culverts and culverts that we feel are a high priority for reinspection. We're actually going in and performing manned entries and CCTV work within the swim group. We're comparing our findings to the master plan and verifying those maintenance recommendations that were put forth. We've completed 68 out of about 113 culvert inspections service area wide, and 49 of those have been in the Cuyahoga River North subwatershed. Just to give you an example of some of the things that we see when we're underground, this is a culverted stream, a corrugated metal pipe culverted stream in Garfield Heights. In this case, you can see the invert of the pipe is perforated all the way through, and stream flow is actually entering those perforations and able to flow underneath the pipe. Next slide. Another corrugated metal pipe in Garfield Heights. As you can see, the invert is intact on this pipe, although heavily rusted. Heavy rust, along the walls and the crown. And in this pipe, especially, we noticed severe degradation at a lot of the local tie-ins. There were about 21 tie-ins in this pipe that would need some form of rehab or replacement. Next slide. Finally, we'll give some details on the Labor Day storm event. Depending on where you were in the service area, you may have experienced between 0.83 and 4.55 inches over about a 7-hour period. That equates to a 6-hour recurrence interval of less than a year storm to just less than a 200-year storm, with an average of about a 25-year storm. Skipping down to the bullet point there at the bottom, in terms of the 15-minute recurrence interval, however, the storm only put down about 0.32 to 0.81 inches of rain over that 15 minutes, which really equates to a very average type storm. So what we noticed was that the local system really was able to handle that 15-minute recurrence interval. A lot of that rain, that initial rainfall, was able to saturate into the ground rather than run off. It wasn't until the rain just kept coming that we saw those reactions in the larger regional streams. This is the hydrograph for Big Creek at Cleveland. As you can see, this was the 4th highest record ever for Big Creek. 2 other events, the May and March storm, were also in the top 10. Big Creek was the only stream in the service area to reach that major flood stage that we have gauges for. And 2 other streams, the Cuyahoga River at Independence and Mill Creek at Garfield Heights, reached moderate flood stage. Just a few photos from our field inspections the day of that event. This is Big Creek at Jennings Road. This is Broadway Avenue and Garfield Heights along Mill Creek. And this is Mill Creek, Lower Mill Creek. My truck is parked on Canal Road looking downstream towards the Canal Towpath Aqueduct, just about ready to overtop. In terms of SWIM's response, our inspection staff was able to complete about 90 inspections. Maintenance staff responded to 29 maintenance work orders, removing about 812 cubic yards of debris at a cost of about $86,000. We also received 18 customer calls. Comparing the September 7th to the March 30th storm, as you can see, we did complete a few more inspections than March. However, our maintenance projects and cubic yards removed both decreased pretty significantly. And that's all I have. I'd like to turn the mic over at this point to Kevin Fries with the Cuyahoga County Office of Emergency Management.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the Cuyahoga County Office of Emergency Management is designated as the emergency management agency for all 59 municipalities in Cuyahoga County. The City of Cleveland does have a separate Office of Emergency Management for internal coordination within the City of Cleveland. Our office is responsible for maintaining countywide response plans, public outreach, resource coordination, damage assessments, and drone response. During normal times, our goal is to encourage people to prepare for emergencies to lessen the impact if and when disaster strikes. But as for this audience, you can help in that effort by ensuring your agencies and communities have continuity of operations plans, have identified potential areas of concern, such as these master plans have done, and also identifying mitigation projects for stormwater or other disasters. Next slide, please. So, what is the perception of emergency management versus the reality? The perception is emergency management is the team that only comes during a major disaster like hurricanes, etc. However, our local emergency management agencies work to mitigate areas of concern within our jurisdiction through the use of Homeland Security grant-funded projects, LEPC-funded projects, and others. Next slide, please. Emergency management is the process of preparing for, mitigating, responding to, and recovering from emergencies and disasters. The key to all of these phases of emergency management is coordination. A lot of our efforts surround identifying additional partners that we have not worked with before that could benefit from our assistance in developing plans or could assist in response during a disaster. That's how we ended up getting in touch and as part of these meetings. Next slide, please. So, what is Cuyahoga County? It's approximately 1.2 million people in 59 municipalities, covered by more than 60 law enforcement agencies, 51 fire departments, 28 public safety answering points. That number actually has gone up. 31 school districts, 19 hospitals, more than 35 non-governmental organizations, 34 specialty teams, which are our hazmat, bomb, and SWAT teams, 14 utility companies, and 8 colleges and universities. Next slide. We're also home to a lot of headquarters for many national and international companies. We have 3 airports. We have top-tier hospital systems, including Cleveland Clinic, which is the area's largest employer, university hospitals, and the Metro Health System. We also have federal installations here in Cuyahoga County. NASA maintains the Glenn Research Center. We also have some other defense-related installations. Next slide, please. Because of all of this, we have billions of dollars in infrastructure. We have a lot of freight and passenger rail operations that come through Cuyahoga County on its way to other places. We also have a port on Lake Erie. So, next slide, actually, yeah. So, the county is subject to a wide variety of natural and human-caused and technological hazards. We've had freezing rain, as evidenced by the lighthouse being frozen, blizzards, tornadoes, earthquakes, even the river caught on fire. We've had massive power outages, hurricanes have affected us, and major flooding. We've also seen various organizations in the county become the subject of IT system failures or hacks. Next slide, please. As you can see from this list, the large majority of our presidentially declared disasters have been flooding-related events. Next slide, please. So even though all of these things have passed and the river has significantly improved, we still continually work to plan and coordinate with the whole community, especially its 59 political subdivisions. Next slide, please. So why am I here today? I'm here because during our conversations with the sewer district, we were told about these meetings and that it was a group of people that we don't generally interact with. We wanted to make sure you were aware of what our role is related to damage and flooding, and also that when disasters or incidents cause damage, it's our job to collect as much information as possible so that we can determine if our county would be eligible for a disaster declaration. With a disaster declaration, there are 2 funding streams that can open up. If we get a state or federal disaster declaration, individual assistance is for residents who have been impacted, and public assistance is for governments and nonprofit response partners to recuperate some of the expenses that they have incurred in responding to that incident. Thus, we need to know how many structures are destroyed, how many have suffered major damage, suffered minor damage, and were simply impacted. We also need to know what the municipal government and those response partners spent to respond to and recover from the incident. We take that information from the different communities and partners, compile it, make a preliminary determination as to whether or not we might meet the threshold for assistance, and if so, we submit that package to the state for their review and ultimately their request to FEMA. Next slide, please. So what do we do during non-response times when, it's calm? Our office is split into two divisions, operations and planning. Can you advance one more? Thanks. Operations is responsible for maintaining the Emergency Operations Center, which is where I'm actually joining you from, in a fully ready state, coordinating damage assessment teams, and supporting the local Emergency Planning Commission, which is our hazmat coordination group, designing exercises to test all those plans, providing general administrative support. The planning section, on the other hand, maintains over 100 different plans, coordinates training sessions for our partners in emergency planning and response. We conduct outreach events, maintain our website and social media accounts, and provide technical assistance and guidance for our community partners and agencies. A few of those plans that are significant to this group are the All Hazards Mitigation Plan, the Threat Hazard Identification Risk Assessment, or the THIRA, and the Stakeholder Preparedness Report, or SPR. The All Hazards Mitigation Plan is especially important because it makes us eligible for the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant, the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This plan is updated every 5 years, so we'll be starting next year in 2021 on the update. And it requires stakeholder input and will need to be accepted by every community and agency that is interested in applying for grant funds to complete mitigation projects. The THIRA and SPR enable us to apply for more public safety related grants through the Department of Homeland Security. Completion of those also requires stakeholder input, which we usually obtain through the various committees of the Cuyahoga County Emergency Services Advisory Board. One of those committees is actually the Public Works Committee. This committee has been less active in recent years, and we're hoping to reinvigorate it. So if you or anyone you know is interested, please let our office know. Next slide, please. So during an incident or disaster, as local communities run out of resources during an incident and normal mutual aid has been exhausted, those communities or partner agencies reach out to our office. We in turn search for the needed resources within the county. And if we can't find it within the county, we reach out to neighboring counties as well as the state for assistance. If the state doesn't have anything available, they can then reach out to neighboring states as well as the federal government for assistance. We've done this on a smaller scale with the Arco landfill fire a couple of years ago, which required multi-day response, as well as large events, pre-planned events like the presidential debate or the upcoming NFL draft. Next slide. With that, I will say thank you for your time, and are there any questions? If not, I will turn it over to our next presenter.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'm Janet Popielski. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager. And I'm going to start off first by talking about our project prioritization process, and then I'll get into more about our design and construction program. But our project prioritization process is what actually creates our design and construction program, because it's how we decide which projects we're going to move forward with and at which time. So we've been looking at different ways to prioritize, and in the past we've been looking at the benefits of doing the project. So how much is the uplift of the regional system? You know, how much floodplain are we able to capture? Those types of things. But with all the data that we've been acquiring from the stormwater master plans that Rachel talked about, we realized that we had an opportunity to look at the project prioritization from a different way, in a different way. And this was by looking at the number of problems and then the level of service in the areas where those problems exist. We've divided these into 4 quadrants, and you can see in the lower left-hand side that our low priority projects would be where there's a low number of problems and a high level of service. So this would be an area where you would have, say, one house that is impacted at the 50-year event. So again, you have a home that's impacted, but it's pretty infrequently. Moving up from there, you would get, there's a low number of problems and a low level of service. So this would be an area, say like a road where it's impacted at the 2-year event. We're looking at the 1 through 100-year events for these types of scoring that we're developing right now. So a 2-year event and one section of road, this might be somewhere where maybe we could do a smaller project and address that issue right away. Or if it's a house, we might look to see if that owner would be willing to sell, and that way we could take care of that problem rather quickly. Moving into the next quadrant is a high number of problems, but a high level of service. These would be areas where you could have, say, 20 to 30 homes, but they don't flood again until the 50 or 100-year event. And then the highest priority projects that we look at in the upper quadrant is a high number of problems with a very low level of service. So these are areas that we're finding where there could be hundreds of homes, roadways, erosion occurring, and it's on a very frequent basis. A lot of these areas are some of the bigger projects that Rachel was referring to with the advanced planning. So we are looking at how to split some of these up to move at least some of the sections, some of the portions of them forward. And then through this scoring that we're working on, we can also then look to see the improvements that are being made and how the projects rescore after that's done. Next slide. So I just want to remind everybody that we do have a story map under our Doing Business With Us section on our website. It shows our design, construction, and completed projects. So next slide, please. And as I said, we do have all of our projects that are in design and construction, as well as the ones that are completed. We have also started adding in our smaller projects, the ones that we do through our swim group that are just quoted out. So usually these are under $50,000. We've started adding those into the completed tab so that you can see those as well. They usually occur pretty quickly, so we don't put them in during the earlier stages, but we are showing all those projects as well as the 319 grants that we've been helping out with. Next slide. So moving on to some of the work that we've been doing in design, I'm actually going to highlight a project that's completed. So next slide, please. So this is Stickney Creek in the city of Brooklyn by Ridge Road. And this was a project that we've been working on for a couple of years. We did it as a design build. This part of the creek had an exposed intercommunity combined sewer in it. So the actual sewer was in the creek. Water was going from the creek into the sewer, and most likely vice versa as well. So we decided to take this opportunity and do 2 things. First of all, we moved the sewer away from the creek. This also allowed us then the opportunity to expand the floodplain to address the water that was coming down during these larger events. This was from August 28th, and this was taken by a resident. There's actually a small housing development right next to this. If you could go to the next slide. This was just a few hours later. So we just consider this to be a very successful project, a great example of what we can do with the regional stormwater system to address the root problem, which was the exposed sewer, but then also improve the entire system. The resident who took the first picture told me that usually that crossing would have overtopped in this type of event, but this time it didn't. So we definitely were able to gather more storage in there. Next slide. One of the projects that we're finishing right now, and actually has been bid out, is the Pepperluce Creek at Lander Road in the city of Pepper Pike. This project is aimed at arresting stream bank erosion and also protecting some utility assets. There's a septic system that's being eroded into. But we're taking the opportunity again to create and expand floodplain. So this project has just been bid and is being awarded. Next slide. Another one that we've just completed the design on and our board awarded it today is the Ridge Road Repair and Rocky River Stabilization, Rocky River Tributary Stabilization in North Royalton. This is a great example of where a stream had been eroding into the roadway. You can see in the upper picture that it was into the pavement. The guardrail was actually just hanging off. The posts were completely exposed. If you go to the next slide, the approach that we decided to take, rather than just armoring the embankment, the toe of the embankment and trying to protect the road, was actually to address the root cause of the problem, which was that the stream shouldn't have been that close to the road in the first place. So working with private property owners, we acquired easements in order to move the stream away from the roadway, create more floodplain, and address more and provide more benefit to the regional stormwater system. Next slide. The Chippewa Creek Bank Stabilization near Broadview Road and Broadview Heights is also aimed at addressing stream bank erosion and protecting a local sanitary sewer. We'll be relocating the stream away from a very large gabion wall that you can see in the lower picture. That's holding up a apartment complex parking lot. And this project is in the final stages of design and hopefully we'll be bidding it out next year. Next slide. The Big Creek Upper Ridgewood Basin modifications is one of the portions of a project that Rachel highlighted earlier. And this is a great example of where we have a very large project area, but we know that we have an opportunity that we can move forward with right now. The Upper Ridgewood Basin is a city-owned basin, and we'll be looking to expand it to increase the capacity and reduce the downstream flooding. As we move through the advanced planning, we'll start to identify other areas where we can continue to do work in this larger area. Next slide. And then just to highlight a couple of the projects that we currently have under construction. One is the West Creek Bank Stabilization in the city of Parma near Sandpiper Drive. The West Creek itself was eroding into a parking lot and drive access for an assisted or a skilled nursing facility. It was actually starting to threaten the ability for the ambulances to come in. So a lot of times we don't have enough room to relocate the stream or to widen the floodplain. And so we do have to put in soldier pile walls. And so this was definitely one of those instances where all the neighboring development just made it impossible for us to do a different type of project. But we do look to capture as many benefits during these projects as we can to the regional system, in addition to protecting the building. Next slide. And then the final project that I'd like to highlight is the Doan Brook Culvert debris removal. This project came to our attention after some of the flooding that University Circle had experienced in the past several years. It was determined that there were 2 debris blockages within the Doan Brook culvert that were lowering the level of service from a 10-year down to a 2-year. One of the debris blockages was removed during an earlier project because its close proximity to the outfall of the culvert. But the second one was 1,500 lineal feet up into the culvert. After we realized through the Stormwater Master Plan the impact of this debris on the level of service, we decided to move forward with it. Next slide. And this is the debris that we'll be removing. So this will probably be a pretty long process. We have to go 1,500 feet up into the culvert with small equipment, and they do have to work in the wet. But again, if we can get the level of service increased by that amount by removing some debris, then we're going to go ahead and do those projects. So with that, are there any questions?
I do not see any listed.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it back to Donna.
Thanks, Janet. And thank you to everybody who was able to present today. That was a lot of really good information. It looks like we don't have any questions, but we'll check back one more time at the very end to make sure that there aren't any unanswered questions. So finally, I just wanted to touch on our cost savings programs. The Crisis Assistance Program, the slide you see right now, is up to a $300 sewer credit, and that's for those who have experienced financial hardship within the last 6 months. That can be loss of job, death in the family, medical expenses. So that's one option that we offer. And then our homestead and our affordability programs apply to both our sewer fees and our stormwater fees. The homestead program is for people 65 and older or who are permanently disabled, and there is an income limit on that. And then the affordability program is for those who are at or below 200% of the poverty level. If you have customers in your community who you believe could apply for one of these programs and receive these benefits, you can have them call our customer service number. We also have a good handful of materials that we can bring to city halls or wherever else you think they would be picked up and used by people. So we're happy to drop those off as well. And with that, here's my contact information in case you need it and you don't have it. Thank you to everyone who presented. Keith, are there any more questions before we end this?
There are none.
Okay, well with that, thank you so much for attending our October 2020 Cuyahoga River North WAC meeting, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.